Hey everybody, John Pollock and Cody Saftik with you, and we are chatting about a recent fight announcement from the UFC, and that is Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who will be taking on Claudia Gadelha in a battle of two women that fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk in 2016, spread out throughout the year. We got an Ultimate Fighter season with Gadelha, and then Kowalkiewicz fighting her at Madison Square Garden. I guess the obvious question is if a win here propels one of these women into another fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who has to get by Jessica Andrade first and foremost. With Gadelha, though, she's had two fights with the champion at this point. I don't know if a third is necessarily going to be one fight away from her. But for Kowalkiewicz, if you ask John Ramdy, and he wants to see the rematch immediately.
Yeah, well, certainly you're taking the two best fights that Joanna Jędrzejczyk's had, the most competitive fights that she's had, and you're pairing them off against each other. It's obviously going to make a fantastic matchup. But the UFC now certainly has options. They don't have to propel the winner of this directly into a title fight. As we know with Joanna, she's going to be taking on Jessica Andrade, and that's a very interesting fight as well. On the side note, you have Michelle Waterson taking on Rose Namajunas, and that could very well produce the next title contender. But when you have two girls like this that can't just sit around, you have to throw them in, you have to keep them busy, and this is a fantastic fight. Kowalkiewicz, and here's the other thing, I don't know if it's going to be a 5-round fight, but if it is a 5-round fight, you would think that Kowalkiewicz could definitely pose the same problems that Joanna had, in that she has an endless amount of cardio. She can keep pushing. Flip side to that, Claudia Gadelha, she's now moved full-time to Greg Jackson's gym in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We saw her last fight against Courtney Casey Sanchez. She was under the tutelage of Greg Jackson, but still only 28. I expect her, the best fights of her career are still coming up. I expect that she should realize even a higher level of potential. And if she does, we saw how well she did against the champion Joanna Jędrzejczyk, so that makes it interesting if it happens to go to a trilogy match.
Yeah, I think the 3 rounds does help Gadelha, and when you look at her most recent fight with Joanna last July, it was those early rounds, in particular
almost
rounds 1 and 2,
yes,
that you thought that, wow, Gadelha could pull this off, but it was kind of a reversal of fortune throughout the latter half of the fight.
Yeah, absolutely, and then that's the kind of thing that you can go back and you can make adjustments. But like anything, like people not saying, well, I don't really want to see Joseph Benavidez fight Demetrius Johnson. Does he deserve it? 100% deserve it. Should he be the guy? Absolutely. But when you fight the champion twice and you lose, maybe that interest is not there. You're looking to go with fresh matchups. But there's no denying that she's one of the highest ranked competitors currently in the division. She deserves that other crack if she can earn it. This would go a long way in earning that shot. So I think there's interest there on the fan standpoint. As I mentioned, building out the division, creating different storylines, opening more options. If eventually, and we talked about this last week briefly, but if eventually they do open a women's flyweight division and Joanna Jędrzejczyk moves up to 125 pounds, well, that opens a lot of doors for either competitors that want to jump up or competitors that maybe want to take that throne at 115. So as I mentioned, it's something that's building itself up, and I'm certainly intrigued.
Do you like the fact this is being paired? It's on the same pay-per-view card as Jose Aldo and Max Holloway. I don't think that this is a pay-per-view you can imagine is going to do huge numbers, but the arena business at the HSBC Arena in Brazil, I think that this is, a nice complement to that main event, because that's an outstanding fight for the featherweight title that you have headlining this card.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good support. I think they're going to have to add quite a few good fights onto the card to really make it something special, but this goes a long way in that. And you have someone that's local in Claudia Gadelha. She's going to be able to pull that crowd. And I think there is going to be that interest from the fans. This is a fight worth talking about, which is why we're covering it. And I think that really the fan interest is starting to head towards some of these divisions. We might not see it in the men's flyweight division, but some of these lower ranked weight classes are really starting to pick up some steam. And I think when you have a dominant champion like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, someone who looks good, she speaks good, she fights extremely well, it's going to create that interest, but you need challengers for her, and the UFC is doing exactly that.
Is this the best the strawweight division in terms of depth has had? I mean, we're just over 2 years into this division, and I would say it's, in my opinion, progressed at a quicker rate than flyweight did. I mean, a lot of talented fighters we saw at flyweight, but you didn't see a lot of dominant contenders, mainly because there was a really dominant champion at top, which strawweight does have now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. See, they've opened it up, and now you're starting to see everyone starting to flood in and more talent flood in. When you look at the division prior to the UFC adopting it, so to speak, Jessica Aguilar largely dominated the division. Carla Esparza was one of the top-rated challengers in the division. She ends up winning the title. Look how much the division's progressed since then. Randa Marcos wasn't even ranked in the top 15 heading into that last fight with Esparza, and she can defeat Esparza. The girls that were at the top are now not at the top anymore, and you're seeing new challengers. Girls like a Paige Van Zandt, Michelle Waterson, Rose Namajunas, Tisha Torres, they're all developing at a very quick rate and surpassing these former champions, these former title challengers. So I think it's definitely headed in the right direction, and I think that it's not something that you can say, well, right now it's the most stacked division, but give it a couple of years and it's certainly headed in that direction.
That's going down at UFC 212. It's a strawweight bout as Karolina Kowalkiewicz returns, and we're taking on Claudia Gadelha.